Hello and welcome to our Janome Embroidery Mastery video. We are planning to go over today embroidery on your Janome, and that includes the Continental M17, but also the 500E, the 550E, the Skyline S9, the 9850. All of those embroidery machines will be covered. We are going to have two machines set up so that I can show you on the two different types of screens what that looks like on your particular screen. In order to do this mastery, I'd love if you followed along. It's meant to be followed along. This is literally just the class that I do with our students, just recorded. So, you're in class with me, you're going to have your machine set up, and we're going to go through this together. So what you should plan to have ready is a hoop. I would get one of the smaller ones so that you're not wasting a ton of stabilizer and fabric. And then you'll need some quilting cotton, so bigger than the size of your hoop. You'll need 2 pieces of that, and then you'll need some stabilizer. Now, if you don't have any stabilizer right now, I would say you can go get some like medium weight tearaway stabilizer, and you don't have to worry if you don't know what that is. You can ask for help at the store, but you're generally going to be able to use that even after this class. So if you need to go get some, I'd say medium weight tearaway. I have a heavyweight cutaway here, so whatever you've got, as long as it's not super, paper thin, will be just fine. You'll need 3 sheets of that that are bigger than your hoop. It might come in a roll, so you can just get a roll and then cut it off of the roll when you get home. And then you will need a little square. This one's maybe 6 inches by 6 inches of either faux fur or fleece or a towel, something with some thickness and some fluff to it. If you're feeling super cool, you can follow along with me by getting a product called Stitch H2O. However, you do not have to pre-buy that. You are welcome to just watch me use it. You'll still be able to do the whole class, and you can decide for yourself if you're interested in that. We'll be using that with our faux fur. Whoa. Okay. Oh, other tools you'll need. So those are the fabric materials. You're going to need your embroidery foot, of course. That's the P foot or the PM foot. Your straight stitch plate. Your embroidery bobbin case. You should have 2 bobbin cases, and they should have part numbers printed in them, and then your manual should tell you which of those part numbers is the embroidery bobbin case. I've got some little thread snips. I've got a screwdriver, and I've got a chalk pencil. If you don't care about marking your fabric, you can just use a pen. I have a dark fabric, so I'll be using a chalk pencil. And then thread-wise, while you're on your shopping trip, if you need one, you're going to want to pick up a bobbin thread. This is 100% polyester, 60 weight, or 80 weight, or 100 weight. Again, you don't have to know why. We'll talk about why, but you have to know enough to tell, somebody at the store, I need a bobbin thread for embroidery that's a 100% polyester, 60, 80, or 100 weight thread. And then for the top, you will need a 40 weight 100% polyester. I will accept a rayon in a pinch if you want polyester or rayon, but I like polyester, and this is a heavy weight, and it's for embroidery. It's shiny. Other than that, keep your other accessories nearby in case I think of something that I say, grab this, I don't know, extra tool or something, just in case. Don't pack it all back in the basement. But with that, I will leave you to collect your things. I'm going to organize my life, and then we'll start setting up our machines for embroidery. All right, so let's start with getting our machines set up. If you have a Janome 500E or 550E, this really won't apply to you because yours is always set up for embroidery. But if you have an M17, a Skyline S9, or a 9850, which does both sewing and embroidery, you will need to switch over from sewing mode to embroidery mode. So the first thing that we're going to do is put our embroidery module on. For the M17, this is very easy to demo. We are simply going to slide this big module until it clicks. Notice that my machine is off when I do this. If it's on, it will simply tell me to turn it off and then on again. Whenever you add a component or take away a component like this, it wants to reset itself. So now I will turn it on. For attaching the Skyline S9 or 9850, I will show you that in a different segment. All right, let's talk about getting the embroidery module onto your Skyline S9. First thing I'll do is turn the machine off. And if you are just getting the machine out of the box, on the back of the machine, there should be a white plastic cover covering the naked mechanics you can see right now. And you just push that sort of to the left and it should pop right off. Nice little aesthetic cover for when you're not embroidering, but we'll need that off. Now we're going to take the module and we'll orient the module so that Janome's looking at us. And I'm to the left of the machine. And I am going to slide this onto the back like so. And I start quite far to the left because it has to start catching onto that track. And then it will pop all the way on. Now it's flush. Okay, so now it's attached, and honestly, you can just leave it there forever and sew with the machine. Basically, it is in sewing mode when this is closed. So when it wakes up, it knows to go to sewing mode. And then when I switch to embroidery mode by tapping the little machine/machine, it'll say the carriage arm is not open. You can still go to embroidery mode, but that's a great reminder. To open the carriage, there is a release lever on this side. It's a little hole. Push down, pops open, help it all the way open, and it clunks into place. So it'll lock in place. My embroidery arm is now ready to use. It will say, okay, I'm going to move. So I hit OK, and it does a little calibration dance. Perfect. And you're ready to proceed, getting ready for embroidery. So we are in sewing mode at this time. We're going to swap to embroidery mode. If you have a Skyline S9 or a 9850, you will have an icon on the right side of the screen that shows a machine with a hoop on it and then a machine without a hoop, usually with a slash between it. So you would tap that to swap between those two modes. On the M17, we press home and then embroidery mode. Says switch to embroidery mode, make sure the proper presser foot is attached. So it gives you a nice reminder about the presser foot, but there's more than just the presser foot that we are going to swap. We'll start with the presser foot. So we use our screwdriver to take off the ankle. So I'm reaching to the screw on the left side that holds the whole ankle on, sliding that whole thing off. And then you have two choices. Some of you are going to have just a regular P foot. So basically everyone who doesn't have an M17 has a P foot, and it's this metal loop foot. And that just goes on the screw the same way that that ankle came off. If you have an M17, you have the PM foot, which is the same shape, but it has a laser option on it. That's what we'll use. So we slide it on from the back. The little attachment opening goes over the screw, tighten that down. And on a Janome, you always want to do an extra tighten with the screwdriver because Janome screws that are finger tight will tend to loosen over time. Okay, so at the back of the M17 only, there's a little door that should pop open. There it is, opening on the left, opens to the right, and it covers a little port, and it's a puzzle piece. So I've got a puzzle piece here. It is shaped so it can't go in the wrong way. And I plug it in. That's how it's going to get power and signal to run the laser. If you don't have that, you don't have a door back here, don't worry about it. Perfect, so our foot is on. What else do we have to swap? We are going to swap both our stitch plate and the bobbin case. The stitch plate we are going to trade for the straight stitch plate, which has 3 holes in it. To swap your stitch plate on a 9850 or an S9, you need to take off the accessory tray around the machine. You just pull on the left side, it pulls off, and that will expose a little lever on the front bottom of the free arm. You push that down and the plate pops up. On the M17, we're first going to press the lock button here or on the mini screen, and that pops up a little icon that says raise plate. We tap that, it demagnetizes, we grab it, and we are also going to take this opportunity to swap our bobbin case. So I just grab that and pull it out. There are two bobbin cases with these sewing and embroidery machines. The way that I tell the difference is I look at the weight inside. They should be printed with a part number, and then they should say a number value followed by grams, so like 10 grams, 20 grams. You want to use the one that has a heavier or a higher number, so something like 20 grams, 15 grams. I don't go by the color painted on the bobbin cases because those have shifted over time, and so what I say now may not apply always. So I always go by whichever one has the higher number followed by a G is the one that you want to use for embroidery. When you found that one, we're going to tuck it in. If you're not comfortable doing that, I do have a review of that in my sewing mastery video for the advanced Janomes, and if you skip to the end, I go over that. I've got that laying nice and level, and now I'm going to put on my straight stitch plate. This one will just magnetize down really nicely. If you've got one of the manual machines, you'll just push down on the right-hand side. Okay, and then M17 owners will unlock. So I've swapped my bobbin case, I've swapped my foot. I would also swap my needle. Now I'm lucky, I already have an embroidery needle in here, but if you do have a sewing needle in, when you get into embroidery, you will want to invest in embroidery needles. The big difference is they have a bigger eye and a bigger groove down the center, which minimizes friction on your thread. Because unlike sewing, which has a lot of stopping and starting, embroidery can run for half an hour uninterrupted at the top speed of the machine. And that is very stressful on your thread. Friction builds up, heat builds up, and so we're reducing friction. If you don't have an embroidery needle right now, it's not the end of the world for this class. We're not going to spend long periods of time embroidering continuously, and so it shouldn't really be an issue for today. But in the future, when you do real embroidery projects, you'll want to invest in those. The needle is taken out with the little screw on the right-hand side here, and then just make sure you pop the new one all the way up until it hits the stopper. Okay, so those are our hardware changes. We are also going to make changes to the thread that we are using. Our bobbin thread is distinct from sewing bobbin thread in two ways. Number one, it is 100% polyester. That is for strength and color fastness, even though on the bottom it really won't matter. What I have, for instance, is called bottom line. There's also Cerulean that we carry. There's other options out there, but you want a very lightweight, that's the other difference. So 60 weight, 80 weight, or 100 weight, 100% polyester thread. Thread numbering is different than needles. The bigger the number on your needle, the bigger the needle. Thread is opposite. The bigger the number on the thread, the thinner the thread. The way I remember it is it would take, say, 60 strands of that lighter weight thread to equal the same weight achieved by 40 strands of a heavier weight thread. So 40's heavy, 50's medium, 60's light, and then you can even go 80, 100. Bottom line is 60 weight, and it's quite fine. I want you to take a second and just throw out a guess, shout at your screen, why you think we use a lightweight bobbin thread on the bottom. Okay, I heard a lot of good answers. The main reason that we use it is to decrease bulk. In an ideal world, nobody's looking at the back of your embroidery project. And even if they do see it, say it's on the back of a t-shirt, they understand it's not supposed to look as good as the front. So if nobody cares about the filling in, cleanly of the back, we just need to use a really thin thread so that our design is not immensely thick and bulky. We also don't change the color of the back thread once we've chosen the main color according to our fabric. So I've got white and black here. There's also a bunch of grays and light browns that you can choose. And they're monochrome essentially because it doesn't matter what color is on top. We're not going to see the bobbin thread. So I match it to the value of the fabric. So if I have a very light fabric, I'd use a white bobbin thread. Very dark fabric, I'd use a black. And then a middling value, I would use a gray. With the idea being, if it peeks through a little bit, it's not going to be the end of the world. You really won't notice it. So I've got 60 weight bobbin thread, and I'm going to thread that up. If you're unfamiliar with bobbin winding and threading of your machine, and this would go for really anyone with any of these machines, you can go watch the very beginning of our Janome Advanced Mastery class, where I do go over that on several different machines, and it is identical. Okay, our top thread will also change. We are going to use a 100% polyester heavyweight thread, which you might recall I said was 40 weight, if you want to get technical about it. I have Isocord here. There's lots of good options, good brands. I do really encourage you to find polyester. Rayon was the original embroidery thread, and it was very shiny, silky, wonderful, but it's not as strong, and so you will get shredding and breaking more often. Now that they can produce such shiny polyesters, people have really swapped over, and I encourage you to do so as well. I love polyester thread. Okay, now, while I'm threading this up, think to yourself, why do you think we use a heavyweight embroidery thread on the top if I said we needed to decrease bulk on the bottom? Hopefully you had the idea that it's about filling in space. If I gave you a coloring sheet and several different sizes of markers, if you were smart, you would pick the big marker so that you had to do fewer passes back and forth with the marker to fill in the space. Same idea with the thread. We're hoping to fill in more space with each pass of the needle. Okay, I did pause here right at the threading of the M17 because I do think it is worth revisiting, even though it is in my other video. So for M17 owners, we know that we go through our normal thread path. We end at the what I call a seat belt right above the needle. Make sure you pull your thread all the way to the left into a little opening and then up to this little metal mouth. It pops behind a little tooth. And then this is where I get calls and people say my machine isn't threading. So notice that your needle threader button is not lit right now. That means that the needle is not at the correct height for it to thread. And it's true in all machines that your needle needs to be at its highest position for the needle threader to work. This machine is just kind enough to point that out to me rather than letting me make that mistake. So I'm going to use my thumb wheel to raise the needle. I think I'll also lower my foot. Oh, you know what? I forgot a step, silly me. I need to lock the machine. There we go. Now, if my needle's too low, the needle threader light turns off, and then when I raise it, boom, the light comes on. So it's a little approval that it's at the right height. Now I can push that. All right, so we've made all of our hardware and thread changes. We are ready to get going. So like I mentioned in our intro, we are going to go about this in several different activities. We're going to move from the quickest way to get started through to some of the more advanced things you might want to do. So the very first activity we're doing is like baby's first embroidery. Let's just get you going so you can start playing with this cool new, activity you have. I'm going to unlock my screen. And so this first activity is, let's get a design from built into the machine. We don't have to go anywhere extra for a design. And then let's just go right to stitch out and do some stitching. So the traditional screen, which I will reference on the 500E here, has always been this flower, ABC, and grid. You can get to this at any time by pressing the home button to bring this up. The flower means built-in design, the lettering is built-in lettering, and then the grid is edit. And we'll get there. But we're going to start by pushing the flower, and it brings up all the built-in designs sorted. And you can sort them in one of two ways. You can sort them by designer, or you can sort them by hoop size. If I tap the flower up here, it will sort them by designer or design type, and I've got several pages here. I love the little owl, so let's find that. I think that's in Petite Designs. Select that, and then I love this little guy. Okay. Now, on the M17, because they have more screen space, they can fit all of that on the main page. So we have flower, hoop size, lettering, and editing. So no grid. It's a flower with a pencil. On this one, I'll show you the hoop size option, which is the other option on the 500E, where I just showed you there's a little hoop next to the picture of the flower. So we go sort by hoop size, and this is good for me when I teach these classes because I don't care as much about the design as much as I care that it fit into one of the smaller hoops, because I'm always trying to conserve stabilizer for these classes. So I would sort by the hoop that we're going to be using. The hoop that I'm using is, okay, so most of the hoops will have their identifier written on them, especially if they look similar to another hoop. This one's our big square hoop that's not metal. And so that is going to be SQ28D. It's not the one that shows the magnets on it, which is for the magnetic quilting hoop. So SQ28D, and I get restricted to just designs that are going to fit into the hoop. And, oh, let's check out this little school bus here. Okay, and then it says, look out, I'm going to move my embroidery arm. Perfect. Okay, one last thing to mention about setup on the M17. If you are using the giant hoop, there are some wings you can put on that reach out a little further to support that giant hoop. Those attach here. This pops off, so the base will stay on. Let's see. There we go. Oh, a lollipop. That's really weird. And then you can put a bigger wing on, and it'll come out a little further, and you can do that on both the front and the back wings. Okay. So now that we are going to embroider, we need to hoop our fabric and our stabilizer. Now, stabilizer is its own scary world of learning. And I would say it's one of the big fears that people have about starting embroidery is, what stabilizer do I use? How do I know? Do I have to buy all 50 that are available? And in order to address these questions, we will have a video on stabilizer coming out that you can watch for, that will be for all the brands, not just Janome. So I will direct you to that video, and instead we're going to jump right to the hooping. Okay, so we're going to separate the rings of our embroidery hoop. On the M17, I've got release levers here, so I make sure that those are both open, and if I need to, I can loosen the thumb screws on both sides and pop out the inner ring. Then I'm going to lay my stabilizer on top. This happens to be a heavyweight cutaway. You can use a medium weight tearaway, a medium weight cutaway, just nothing too lightweight. Okay, then I've got my fabric, but I want to point out to you, I'm using one of my favorite products, which is woven fusible interfacing that is fused to the back of the fabric. This is essentially a muslin, so a kind of a cheap weave, white fabric with glue on the back. The way you tell the difference is this side is bumpy with the little glue dots, and this side is not bumpy. And I've fused that on. That is super duper useful for getting rid of wrinkles on lettering or small designs where you get wrinkles in the corners. Okay, got my stabilizer. Got my fabric, and then I am going to orient this hoop so that the L and the R are looking at me, right side up, left and right. The outer hoop is also oriented as it will go on the machine, which is with this left side attachment to the left. Now that is opposite. If you've got a 500E or a 550E, that attachment point is actually to the right. And so you would be using, this one's on upside down, for instance, orientation tools. You've also got an L and an R, and those need to be looking at you with the attachment side to the right. If you ever forget that, just look at your machine. It's whichever side the embroidery module is parked on with the little attachment point. That's the side it needs to be on when you're looking at it. Okay, then we're going to squish the inner ring into the outer ring. My best advice for you is to find an edge, pinch those edges real hard together, and then shove down on the other side. Okay. We've got quick clamp levers on the M17, so I can clamp one side, I can clamp the other side. Those should be pretty easy to clamp. If you're fighting them, you need to loosen your thumb screws some more, because you can actually break these hoops if you force that clamp down when it's already been tightened too tight. We quick clamp on these just to hold the fabric. There isn't a quick clamp on the, say, 500E, 550E, so you would just tighten down halfway, let's say, until it gets a little hard to tighten. We're doing a preliminary tighten to hold everything together. Then we're going to flip this up and make sure that the inner ring is as deep in as it will go, just in case it was barely hanging on one corner. Make sure it's really seated in there. And finally, I'm going to make sure to get my wrinkles out. I've just got a few bulges. So I grab the fabric and I pull upward gently, and the ripples are going to go away. If you pull on the stabilizer, you usually just pop your hoops apart, so don't do that. And I'm only pulling enough to get the big ripples out. I don't want to stretch it tight like a drum. Okay. Now I can go ahead and tighten down using my thumb screws, or on the other hoops, just the main screw. And I want to tighten evenly on both sides when I have two clamping positions like this. You don't want to over tighten one side and not the other. Okay. Yay, and we're all hooped. Okay, let's put the hoops on the machine. So for putting the hoop on the 500E, we're going to push this black release lever towards us, and I'm going to hold it in that position in order to keep the attachment points open. And then I'm going to slide the hoop under the foot. If the hoop doesn't want to fit, you can do an extra high lift temporarily to pop that under, and then pushing that black box toward me, I'm going to slide from left to right and then release to lock in place on those pins. Okay, now to put it on the M17, this is different. They've re-engineered it. So we are going to slide this black bar just into, from front to back, into the slide. I'll hit a little resistance, and I can either help the resistance by lifting, no, I see that won't work. Yeah, just push her in, clunk, and it clicks. Okay. As for the S9 and the 9850, that's a little different than both of those. We'll show you that. When it comes to putting the hoop onto the Skyline S9 or the 9850, we are going to orient it so that this black attachment screw is in the back right side of the machine. I snuck it under the foot there, as you saw. And then this is a little pin in the shape of this port, and we're going to rotate it, locking it into the horizontal position. So we start with this black knob vertical that's aligning that pin in the shape we see here. And then I'm really bad at doing this blind. I usually have to tuck my head level and peek under there. I think I did it though, just now. And then once it's dropped down, I turn this knob. There we go. And I know I get it because it permits it to turn. And I kind of was raising the end of the hoop there to sort of take the weight off, and that seemed to help. Now it's locked. If you're not in the right position, in doing that, it kind of shoves it off, and so you'll know that you didn't get it, and now it's locked on there. Yay! Okay, we are ready to go. So at this point, if we were to lower our foot and hit start, our machine will start stitching. Before we get to that, let's real quick make sure that we understand the information being offered to us on screen. So on the M17, we can see that it says ready to sew at the top, and that's true for everybody's machine. They should all say ready to sew. That distinguishes it, say, from embroidery edit. So we know that if we hit go now, the machine will run. We can see a hoop recommendation, SQ28D. We can see it tells us which foot it thinks we're using. We can see a size, what's the actual size of this design. So the school bus is 5 inches wide, 2.5 inches tall. It's made of 7 colors. We'll come back to this little tension value. Cut is on, cutting function, and it's planning to run at 400 stitches per minute, which will make this take 48 minutes. So regardless of your machine, you should all be able to see all that information on screen. We should also be able to see how many stitches are in the design. This one's 17,325. Okay, at the bottom of everybody's screen, we will also see a list of colors telling us what we need to go grab out of our thread box. This is listed in Janome thread colors. And so that 220, 257, those are the numbers identifying a particular color. You do not have to use those colors, and I would say most of us don't. We would say, okay, I need a white, brown, black, orange, light orange, and then I can scroll. Some of your machines will have arrow keys pointing left and right. This one's got up and down. We can see also I need a light gray and a red. So I would go to my thread box and find those. If I really, really wanted to use what was recommended, for instance, maybe I'm making a sample, and so I want people to know that what I use is exactly how it will turn out if they follow what the machine says. There's a couple things you can do. We can change the thread brand that it's offering us, and we're going to go into our settings to do that. My settings is this gear on the bottom. If you have a 500E, 550E, S9, you're all going to have a wrench picture on the side. It's this white background wrench that says set. So we'll tap our settings, and then we will have 3 categories, usually maybe 4: machine, sewing settings, embroidery settings, and language. This one happens to have Wi-Fi as well. So we're going to go into the embroidery settings, which is the hoop. And then we've got arrow keys. You might have arrow keys down below for some of our other machines. And we've got thread selection. We get a choice of a couple of brands. So for instance, here at the store, we have Mettler Polysheen. So I could say, okay, I know we have that. I'll put it into those numbers. If you don't see your choice of thread on this list, for instance, Isocord is not there, you would then look up a conversion chart, which is available on Google. You would look up, say, Mettler Polysheen thread colors to Isocord 40 thread colors, and it would tell you the equivalent numbers. So you can see now it's 0020, our numbers have changed, and then I could convert that, say, to Isocord. But again, most people don't stress too much about this. You use what you have, and the machine can't yell at you because it doesn't know what you're doing. Okay, couple other useful things we can do right here. we can tell it to show us just an individual step at a time instead of showing me the full color of the bus. So I'm going to go back up to color number 1, which is white. Ooh, let's go down to color 2 actually, which is brown. And I want to make sure that I understand what exactly is going to get stitched in this layer, especially if I may be being creative and I don't want to do brown, I want to do blue. And so I want to understand what all is going to be blue if I really do blue for this layer. You have an icon of a flower in full color with a slash that shows a flower with 1 petal colored. If you've got a 500E, 550E, it will look like this. Here is that option there. It's again a full color flower and a single petal flower. We're showing ourselves the owl tummy there. This is only going to show the first layer. So on the bus, I will push that. And we can see, okay, if I were to change this color to something else, there's everything that's going to stitch in this color. And I keep it like that. I like to know just what's coming up next. Okay, the other information that we can find is how many stitches are in a given color. This would be relevant if I was down to my last gasp of, say, brown. And so I need to know, can I make it to the end with this thread, or do I need to stop what I'm doing and run out and get more thread, which would be inconvenient. That's not my preference. So I've got a list here showing thread, thread, thread with a line. And on the 500 and 550, you will also have that box, box, box with a line. You just need to scroll down through your options that you see here on your screen. Okay, when you select that, it shows you both color number and how many stitches are in that color. A good rule of thumb, like 300 stitches or less is nothing. You can do 300 stitches or less with, like, I don't know, 2 feet of thread, probably less. So I would say if it's, less than 300 stitches, you're fine. If it's more than 500, maybe have a couple of twists left on the spool. And then if it's up here in these thousands, then you might have to go get another spool of thread. All right. Well, that's enough talking about setup beforehand. Let's go ahead and just let the machine run. So here's how that's going to work. I'm going to hold the tail coming off of the top thread. I do this for a couple reasons. Number 1, so it can't get slurped up by spaghetti and make a nest on the back. Number 2, it encourages my bobbin thread to come up with the first stitch, which just helps that stitch formation start. And then from there, I can lower my foot and press start. Now, once I've stitched a couple of stitches, I will stop my machine, take my snips, and snip that tail that I was holding. From here, I then hit start, let it run some more. Now, there's going to be a couple things that we're looking for as it starts stitching. Number 1, making sure that it is actually stitching. Number 2, is the bobbin thread showing on top? Do I see any white thread, say, coming up from the bottom to the top? And then I'm also checking that my foot seems like it has enough clearance. The foot right now is really close to the fabric. And that's good. The point of the foot is to hold the fabric down so it doesn't bounce, but there is such a thing as too close, and it can be dragging on the fabric or dragging on the thread, especially if I had, say, a quilt in here or a bag with a thicker fabric. So if I want to adjust that, I have adjustments on screen. For any of my S9 or 500, 550E owners, you're going to be looking for this icon here. If you can't see it, you just need to scroll. That shows a plus and a minus with a triangle. Push that. If you've got an S9, you should have a foot height option here, and it'll show a little foot with a little up down. 500, 550E, they just say you get what you get, and that should be fine in most cases. Okay, on the M17, we do have an adjustment. I would go to either my mini screen, or I can get a duplicate, let's see, over here with the plus minus arrows, or the values, and then we can see this 0.9 millimeters. I can raise it, I can lower it. We've also got some quick presets, 2.2 for a quilt, let's say, 1.7 for most other standard items. And then we can see default, I'll just say default is 0.9, which is quite close to the fabric. This is also where we control the tail cut length, the length it cuts the tail to, and we're good to go. One last thing is I am running at 400 stitches per minute, which is about as low as this machine can go. And that's great for checking your work as you're getting started. But if we're like, okay, I'm good, I would like to run at full speed, we would adjust that actually in the settings. So gear or wrench, depending on your machine, go to embroidery settings, and then you'll find something that says maximum speed setting. And this baby can go quite high, all the way up to 1200. Many of the other machines will max out at about 800. Do you want to run at full speed? I would say yes, when you're doing something basic, you can. So this is a really basic project. It's just soft stabilizer and fabric. There's no zippers, there's no inclusion, sequins, big seams, anything like that. So this could run at full speed, I would say no problem. If you are doing a delicate thread or a design with, you are going to add a zipper, like it's in the hoop, it's a bag in the hoop, then I would say don't run at full speed, because you want to be able to catch any issues as they develop. And personally, just because of the rack it's going to make, I am going to decrease this back down, but we'll go to default. We'll do 600. Okay. And then we'll run it a little bit more, and then we'll talk about tension. Okay, so like I said, one of the first things you're going to be looking for as it starts, besides making sure it's actually stitching, is how is my thread tension? Am I seeing any bobbin thread on the top, which is in this case white? And I'm not, but if I was, I would need to lower my tension. Your tension is controlled either on the M17, on the mini screen with two little threads getting looped together, on the big screen hidden inside of the plus minus bar graph item, or if you're on an S9, 9850 or 500, 550E, it is back in that plus minus triangle option where I was saying you would look for the presser foot height. And it will look like little interlocked threads, and this says 2.2. You're going to lower that number if you're seeing bobbin thread on top. The idea is you are relaxing the tightness of the top thread, and that in turn allows the bobbin thread, which is looped around the top thread, to relax downward as well. Checking the inverse issue, which is, tension too loose, you have to take the hoop off and look at the back. If you take the hoop off and look at the back and it's all top thread color, all I see on the back, say, is yellow, and I don't see hardly any white, that would be a sign that my tension is too loose, because there's so much top thread coming through, it's just overlapping the bobbin thread. And at that point, I might as well not be using bobbin thread, because I'm not decreasing any bulk. Now, I will show you how this is looking. Go ahead and do a cut. Okay. And then to take the hoop off, I lift up the release lever and pull forward. Or on the other machines, you're either going to unturn the quarter turn release on the S9 and the 9850, or push that black box towards you on the 500 550E. Okay. And then hopefully you can see on the back here that I see a little bit of yellow, so about a third of yellow on both sides, little dot of yellow on the back, and then all the rest is white. That's great. It's a bit of a moving target. Really what we care about is that it's not showing bobbin thread on the front, and there's a range of acceptable options on the back. What really matters is the front. Okay. So we'll keep going a little bit more, and then I want to talk about another issue you might have right as you're getting going, which is that your thread breaks. Okay, so to simulate the thread breaking, I am going to remove thread from the machine and then let it notice that it's no longer stitching. Oh, all right. Sometimes I slurp it up like spaghetti. Don't do that. There we go. So it noticed. I also think I slurped up too much spaghetti. I need to go back there, yeah, and cut that off. Okay. So it noticed and it told us to rethread. So we'll go ahead and rethread. Once again, lock and push that needle threader. Okay. Now the issue is, if I just were to hit start here, we took a good 10 stitches before it noticed that it wasn't threaded, which is normal. That's the normal lag time on any machine. But we do need to back up about 10 stitches. This is super easy to do. You have a list of which stitch number you're on with a total at the bottom. So we're on stitch number 2,486 of 17,000. If you're on the 500, 550 or the S9, that is labeled more toward the bottom of your screen with like a little plus minus on either side. And we're going to back up just by hitting minus. I could either just count to 10, or I could watch and see if it was very clear where the stitching ended, and then just go until my needle's back over the stitching that it did do. Okay, so let's say about there. Now, if I had advanced really far and I had a big jump, you can see it's kind of laborious because I'm waiting for it to move with every click. You can make a bigger jump by typing in the number that you want to jump to, and you just have to do the math. So if I want to jump back from 2,471, say back 100 stitches, I can type in 2,341 and do a big jump all at once, which basically takes me back to the start of his hat. And then I'll jump back to where I was, 2,471. Okay. Oh, 247. That's not it. 2, 4, 1. Okay. There we go. Okay. And then I go back to how we started. I'm holding the tail. I hit start stop. I help that bobbin thread come up, and we continue on our way. I think I advanced. I think I transposed some numbers there. I'm sure you were shouting at your screens and saying, no, it's 2,471. Oh well, I'm not super invested in this bus driver. Okay, so that would be how you recover from a thread break. It's possible you would catch the thread break before the machine. And so if you see, oh, thread broke, you can go ahead and just stop it and then retreat a few stitches. You don't have to wait for it to realize. All it does when it realizes it is it stops the machine. So you can just stop the machine if you notice. Okay, so that was our basic introduction so that you guys can start embroidering right away. We grabbed a design that was built into the machine. We read out what colors we needed. We saw, how many stitches we had, how fast it was going. Is our presser foot height correct? Is our tension correct? and we've been able to stitch a little bit of it. If you want to finish your project, if you're invested now, you can keep going. What'll happen when it's done with this color is it will stop, and then this whole list will shift up so that the new item on the list will be the black is on top. And it doesn't give you a special message, it just waits, and it knows that you should know to rethread with that new color. And then you would hit start again and start the process all over again. We here in this class are going to go on and do a second activity. So if you do want to finish, you just pause us and finish, and then we'll see you when you come back. Our next activity, for those of you looking forward to it, we are going to be getting a design from outside the machine and then putting that on a USB stick and transferring it in. So we'll see you back here in a couple minutes. All right, welcome back. We're about to start activity 2. And as I hinted, we are going to go over getting a design from outside the machine, because pretty soon after your embroidery journey starts, you're going to want very specific things other than what's built into the machine. So we're starting with one of our favorite websites for getting designs. Now, it didn't used to be that you would go to websites. It used to be you'd pick up a CD, say at your local quilting bee, or even you might pick up a USB stick that was sold by the publisher. That is declining. You can still buy CDs and have them, say, shipped to you, or pick them up at your local store, in which case you would then use a CD reader to pull those up into your computer's filing system. However, it is changing, and most of the publishers are now going to a purely online mode because it's easier, honestly, for everybody. It's cheaper. You're not paying materials for the case and the CD. And you can get your designs instantly at midnight, let's say. So this is one of our favorite publishers. It's called OESD, and their website is oesd.com. And you can search by what you want to see. So we could say cat, and we'll have a ton of designs under cat. You can also just look through their curated, what should you buy, what's new, sort of options. Now, when you buy a design, you can see these have prices on them. Some of them are individual, some of them are collections. Usually you're looking about $1 to $5 for an individual design. And then once you pay, those go to your design account, your accounts like design storage, which here is called My Designs, and I'm logged into my account. And once they show up, we are going to download the design to a USB stick to bring it to the machine. And this works for all of the Janome embroidery machines. We're going to do this mini bee, which is very topical for the quilting bee. And you can see it asks me, what format do you want to download in? I could download it in all formats, but that's a waste of space on my USB stick. All I need is JEF for Janome embroidery format. So I'm going to select that and hit download. Okay, that is in my downloads. And right now, while I remember what it is, I might consider renaming it. We'll not do that. Well, let's pull that up. So we're going to go to my filing system, and then that should be in my downloads. And then if I'm feeling like organizing it, I could rename it to B Mini so that I know what that is at a glance. Now, you do not have to be able to open these designs on your computer. Your computer is just a transfer device. However, if it had been a day or two since I downloaded this and it still had its original name, which was like, 12902 or something, I wouldn't remember what that was. And so to be able to know what it is, it does help to be able to open a design on your computer. And there are a variety of free softwares that let you do that. My favorite is called My Sonnet. And so when I double click on this, it gets prompted. So this is called My Sonnet. There's a basic version that's free. Looks like I've lost my sign-in, so we won't actually do that for now, but it lets you look at your design. The good news is you don't have to look at your design. You can just transfer them. There's no reason that you have to get an extra software. You definitely don't need to get a paid software to just be able to look at your designs. Okay, so I'm going to plug my USB stick in. And this USB stick is less than 16 gigabytes. That's just an industry standard. You try not to plug a giant USB stick into your machine. It really doesn't always know what to do with it. Okay, and I want to show you that this is empty, and then I'm just going to copy this design over. I clicked and dragged. You can also right-click, copy, and then right-click, paste, which would be available if I had copied that. Okay, so this right here is what most people instinctively will do. What I want to show you is that Janomes need a little bit of a special process, and that this actually isn't going to work to transfer the design. So I want to prove to you first that this doesn't work so that you will be on board when I show you what does work. Okay, let's go to the machine. Okay, so let's plug in our USB stick. There should be a port on the side. There we go. And then to look at the USB stick, we're going to use this little folder with an up arrow coming out of it. And then you can see we can choose between machine and USB stick. And you can see the USB stick, it doesn't show my B. It does show a folder, which is interesting because that wasn't there before. There's nothing in it. So right now, my B design is not visible to the machine. And this is a common tripping point for people getting into embroidery on a Janome. Janomes only want to look in one location for the design, and if it's not in that location, they don't see it. So let's go over how we do that. So the first thing that you would actually do when you go to use a USB stick for the first time, you wouldn't actually go to the computer first. You would go to the machine, plug the USB stick in, and let it sit for like 5 seconds. That allows the machine to put a folder and a filing system onto the USB stick. And because I've just plugged that in, it has done that. And now we're going to go back to the computer. Okay, so we can see now with my USB stick here, I've still got the B that I couldn't see before, but now I've got 2 new folders, EMB, ORD. These are the folders that the machine created onto the USB stick. I want to go inside of EMB and inside of EMBF. That stands for embroidery and, of course, embroidery files. And again, I'm just going to drag that in, let it copy, and then we will go ahead and eject the USB stick and go back to the 500E. All right, so now we take our USB stick with the EMB, EMBF folders, and we plug it into our machine. And then we are going to go to that arrow coming out of an open folder. We make sure USB stick is selected, and then we're actually already inside of the EMB folder. If I go up a level, you can see that EMB ORD, and then EMBF, and we've got our little B ready to go. Now, there's a couple things that I've learned over the years that can go wrong, that can make that even harder than normal. Number one, you're not allowed to rename the EMB, EMBF folders. I tried that once because I wanted to make them easier to operate for a student, you know, where they said embroidery designs here, you know, click me. And what I learned is if you rename them, they are no longer findable. The machine, for some reason, only knows how to look for EMB and EMBF, so no renaming the folders. Second, I've also found on a couple occasions that if I had pre-selected a tiny hoop, so let's say that I was previously stitching with the 5.5 by 5.5 inch hoop, and then I went to go find a design that was bigger than that hoop, it wouldn't show up because the machine was like, that's too big, you can't use that. So the way I would trick it is I would grab the biggest possible design from the machine. So I'd go home, pick a design, choose by hoop size, specifically pick the biggest one, and then pick a design meant to be used in that hoop, We can see now we're using the biggest hoop. Then I would go look for the design, because for some reason then it would allow me to see big designs. The last thing you can try is you can reformat your USB stick if it's not seeing what's on the USB stick. You can plug it into your computer, and there should be an option like by right-clicking on the name of the USB stick to format it, which will wipe everything on the USB stick, so don't have anything irreplaceable on there. Make sure you always have a copy on your computer. But that would be one way to try to reset the USB stick. Okay, so we will just check that out on the M17. So I'm going to plug in, and then on the M17, we're looking for this folder with an arrow coming out of it that's at the bottom. We get the choice of 2 USB sticks. I plugged into USB stick 1. You can just find out by finding out which one says, please insert flash drive. So this was 1, inside of EMB, inside of EMBF, and there it is. This is a little bit of a smarter system. So if you have a naked design that's not inside of a folder, that's out here in, the ether outside the folders, it sometimes can see those. Interestingly, not always does it see those. And then another thing I've seen happen is if you do have multiple different collections on your USB stick, most people, logically would organize those in subfolders. However, if you go into EMB, EMBF, and you're expecting to find a subfolder here and you don't see it, what I would have you try is drag all your designs out of that folder on your computer and just put them, again, unenclosed, just inside of the EMBF folder loose. And I have had that work before to allow the machine to see those designs. Janomes aren't the smartest when it comes to the filing system, and they really need things to be where they expect them because they don't adapt well when something's not where it expected or not in the format it expected. So we try to play by its rules. Okay, so that is bringing a design in from outside the machine. The next thing we're going to do is do some editing on the design and combine it with lettering. What you're going to need for this activity is to hoop up some new stabilizer, new fabric in your hoop. You don't have to go get a design from outside the machine. You can just grab a small design that is built into your machine. Once you're ready and you essentially have the same thing on your screen that I do, we'll come back together and go on. Okay, I'm going to assume you're all caught up with me. We are going to go into editing. Now, I had mentioned this on the 500E, the S9, the 9850, the 550. The way you do that is you press the home button in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, and then a little grid option pops up and you select that. On the M17, it's this design with a pencil on it. And both of those options are going to bring me to the same thing, which is this grid. It is automatically putting it into the smallest hoop possible, with the idea that, of course, on a small design, you'd want to conserve fabric, conserve stabilizer. But we want to tell it right away which hoop we're expecting to use. Okay, so I'll show you on both screens how we select our hoop. On the 500E, it is the very first option in our editing options. This bar travels left and right. Those are all of our editing, and this very first one, which looks like a hoop, is how you pick your hoop. So for instance, maybe I'd go for my SQ14B. On the M17, it says it written out. It even says what size it is. And I would select, I'm using that 28D. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Now let's go through our editing options. And we'll jump back to the 500E here. I want to show you on both screens where you find each of these icons. So the very first thing you can do is move the design around. If you click and drag with your finger, you can drag that design around wherever you want. If you feel like, oh, I've made a terrible mistake, I need that design to go back to dead center, you can reset. If you scroll to the left, you should find an icon that shows a heart at the center of a crosshairs. I'll tap that, and the design is recentered. From there, if I just want to move it downward, but keep it centered in the left-right axis, I could just press and hold the down key and move that design down. On the M17, you also see some arrow keys right here in the dead center. You can move those, or I can click and drag with my finger. I'm tapping and holding, and then if I regret what I did, I should be able to recenter. There we go. Wow, took me a while. Heart, there we go, in the center of a crosshairs. Okay, so that's movement for you. Super duper easy to understand. Jumping back to the 500E, I'm going to start over at the beginning of our editing options because these really do advance in a pretty logical way. So the next one next to the hoop is these two documents on top of each other, which is a pretty common symbol for copy. So if I tap that, I actually did copy it. It doesn't look like it, but I can now click and drag and see that there's now two birds on the screen. And if you hadn't realized that and you kept hitting copy, you would literally, then go to stitch out and have like 3 birds stacked on top of each other. Not a good idea. So I always check my work by clicking and dragging. If I decide, okay, that was fun, I actually don't want 2 birds, the next icon over is trash. Which one am I going to throw away? The one with a faint green box around it. That is the one I want to throw away, so I hit trash. On the M17, I've got that same document icon circled, or excuse me, highlighted there, and then I can click and drag my copy around, or trash can is right here in the bottom left. Throw that guy away. Okay, so we can copy, we can throw things away. The next icon on the 500E is the resize. It's a square and a square with an arrow going between the small and the big squares. So let's tap that, and we see it's 100%. Real quick, I want you to figure out just how small you can make this bird. I'll do it as well. Okay, so it stopped me at 80% size. Of its original size. Can you think of why it would have stopped me? Why can't I go any smaller? Hopefully some of you said because the design will get too dense, and that is the correct answer. The stitches will get so close together that they'll just tie a big knot, because it's not eliminating stitches, it's taking the same number of stitches and squishing them closer together, and so they can't get infinitely dense. Eventually your machine will just break a needle on the mass of thread. That is an industry standard. Basically all machines across the market will stop you at a 20% shrinkage. Now let's figure out how large that bird can go. Okay, 120. You guys think about why it might stop me at 120. I'm going to show the M17 owners where their option for that is. So on the M17 screen, square and a square with an arrow going between them, and we'll just try going up here. Same stopping point, 120%. So why does it stop me from getting bigger? It's not because I'm at the limits of my hoop, and that's super clear on this M17 hoop. I'm nowhere near getting outside the hoop. So it's not that. It has to do with aesthetics. So it's not that the stitches are going to tie a big knot, because they're being spread apart from each other, but they're being spread apart to an extent where it won't look good. It won't look like a nice filled in B anymore. And so for aesthetic considerations, they stop you at 120% expansion, and that again is an industry standard. Okay, I kind of like my big B, so I'm going to keep him big and hit OK. You can reset that if you want. You just go back down to 100%, and we'll go on to our next option. Okay, so back to the 500E. And we are going to click the little right-hand arrow to scooch over to my next set of options. We see 4 arrows pointing at each other. Can you guess what this does? Take 30 seconds, play with those options there, see if you can tell me what exactly this icon is doing. If you're on an M17, you still have 4 arrows pointing at each other and you still have those same 4 options. Okay, so I'll ask you, what did this function do? It rotated your B, of course. So we've got quick select of 45 degrees, and so we're adding up 45 every time, or by 1 degrees, we can go clockwise, we can go counterclockwise. And the limits are going to be between 0 and 360 degrees, which is, a full circle of rotation. And so that will be illustrated there. Okay, if you want your design rotated, go for it. I'm not personally creating a magnum opus here, so that's good enough for me. Okay, back to the 500E and the next icon. Okay, we've got 2 moons sitting either like in a reflecting pool or a half moon looking in a mirror, as I like to think of it. If you've seen our sewing advanced mastery, these should look pretty familiar. These are reflection or mirroring tools. So the first one with like a hamburger, let's say, is flipping the design over the x-axis. So make sure you play with that a couple times. And then the other half moon is flipping it over the y-axis or the vertical axis. We have the same icons on the M17, so make sure you play with those as well. Okay, reflection, super easy to understand. If you want your design reflected, go for it. I'm not particularly opinionated about that. Okay, next option. So on the 500E, you can see that this ABC is grayed out. That's because that's for lettering only. We'll come back to it. And then this group icon is also grayed out. That is because we only have one design. This is meant for having more than one design that you're grouping together. We're about to come to that. Okay, then we've got saving a design. We'll do that a little later. And then some color options, which again, we'll talk about a little later. And we've already talked about the centering option. We'll skip the 1, 2, 3 for now. But let's talk about these 4 hearts in the corner. So this is the 4 corner option. If I drag the bird into the corner, I can hit 4 corners and it copies and reflects it to all 4 corners. This is super useful as a really quick frame option. If you get a design that looks like the corner of a picture frame, you can really quick make an entire frame. I've done fun stuff with, animals and putting them at an angle. You can do kind of weird stuff, accidentally weird stuff, where if it's, on a transition point between the axes, it gets copied kind of weird and it doesn't usually look good like that. So that one works best when your design is in a corner. Let's delete our excess designs. Notice I just tap the ones I want to delete and we'll end up with this as the one winner. Okay. Now we'll go over some of those group and multi-item tools. Okay. Oh, on the M17, I'm sorry. I believe I forgot to show you your 4 corner option, which is the 4 hearts with the crosshairs. Okay. So next option, we'll get some text. So then we can play with that text icon that was grayed out. To add something to this design, we simply go back to Home and then to ABC. On the M17, we're going to go to lettering. No need to press Home because that Home is how we go to sewing. We're just going to press lettering here. And then we get a choice of font. Lots of font choices on the M17. On the 500E, it brings us in automatically. It picks a font called Gothic, but I can select by hitting this upper left-hand corner. It's a italicized A and a regular A, and we get 3 choices: Gothic script, Chelton, whatever, however you'd say that. Cyrillic is the Russian alphabet, so you probably aren't using that. And then some monogram stuff. Okay, so I like script, so I'm going to pick script. And from here, we're going to type out a short word. I'm going to type B. That makes a lot of sense to me. And notice I've got some choices at the top. The first choice says AB, written normally, and then AB tilted. It's harder to see. It's kind of grayed out back there. And if I tap that, it swaps. I think this is kind of a silly option because it's the same thing as me rotating the lettering 90 degrees, which I can do after the fact. So I don't personally do that a lot. Then I've got a choice of small, medium, and large. In general, large only fits a couple of words, medium will fit more, small will fit, a whole sentence. So I usually will type a test term and then check. I'll hit OK. So for instance, I'm going to try large, and then I'm going to type a short word, B, so capital B, and then the last option is lowercase or uppercase, EE, and hit OK. And I check, is that as large as I want it to be? Is it too large? That's fine. But if I didn't like it, I can't go back and edit that particular word. I have to rewrite the word. So I don't bother writing a huge message only to find out I don't like the size of the writing. I write a short message. I say, okay, that has either confirmed I want large or now I want to try medium, and then I'll delete it later. And then when I've narrowed in what size I want, then I will spend the time writing the whole message. You cannot do more than 1 line on this machine. You have to type each line separately. So if you are doing like a quilt label, each line will be typed in and then hit OK, and then go back in and hit OK again. Okay, on the M17, we've got those same options at the bottom here. We can rotate, we can do capitals and lower cases, and we can do small, medium, and large. And let's try medium on this one. And we'll do B, E, E. And then OK. Excellent. And we'll just drag that down below our B. Looks good. OK. So now we're going to have access to our text editing. On the 500E, you can see that ABC with a line under it is now available. If I tap back to the bird, it's not available. I have to make sure I've selected the lettering. And there's 2 different options here. These are fun. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to play. I want you to figure out what the up and down arrows do on both items. On the M17, we're looking at this ABC with a line. And same thing. Figure out what those buttons do. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing that one of the options does a rainbow curve, one does a smile curve, and then the other options are spacing, either space farther apart or space closer together, which I usually use as a adaptation to the curvature, because the curvature will make the spacing kind of weird. You don't have to do the curvature. You can just space your lettering with no curvature as well. Okay, once you're happy with your design, you can go ahead and hit OK to exit out of that submenu. And now that we have 2 items, we can play with group and layering. And so we're actually going to skip the group for now. I want to jump over to this this icon that says 1, 2, 3. And on the M17, same thing, document saying 1, 2, 3. Okay, this is showing some documents layering over each other, and it has to do with the layering of the design. So for instance, if I want to do something artistic, such as putting the word B slightly overlapping my B design, I'm going to look at that and say, okay, it's interesting. It's artistic. What would it look like if the B character symbol was on top of the lettering? The reason they're in this orientation, this layering, is because the picture was first, the words were second, so the words are stitching on top of the picture. We're going to invert that. So we're going to hit the layering option, which is that 1, 2, 3 documents. The next thing that you tap will become the top layer. So I will tap the B, it becomes the top layer. It is now, it's a little hard to tell, but it is now overlapping the letter B. Let me see if I can make them overlap better. Yeah, that's probably a little bit clearer. So the yellow stripes of the B are definitely on top of the letter B here. And then if I do it the other way where I tap the lettering, oh, that's definitely tracking over the picture of the B. If you had a lot of different elements and you wanted to reorder all of them, you'll want to tap them in order from lowest to highest, so bottommost to last one stitched, because each one will take turns becoming the top one in the pile, and so you'll want to tap all of them with the base layer first, second from bottom layer, third from bottom layer, and then tapping, say, the top one last. Play with that a little bit if you're unclear on what I mean. And then you can un-overlap them if you want, unless you think you made a really cool artistic choice, which is totally allowed. I've un-overlapped mine. Okay, so we've played with the overlapping, we've decided it's not for us, or maybe you have and you've layered them how you want. Now, in my B example on the M17, I've moved away from center. But I don't want to recenter both because they'll stack on top of each other, and I've spent some time getting these in a relationship I like. I like the placement of the lettering to the design. So I want to center them as a unit. That is what group is for. So on the M17, it's heart, heart, heart with a line and a mouse cursor, excuse me, on the line. And then on the 500E, same thing. I just scrolled left one click, heart, 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 line, and mouse cursor. I tap that and I get some options. I can either tap the designs individually in order to select them. So I could tap B and it actually becomes unselected because that was selected first. And then I could tap both, or quick selection, I'd rather just say select all, which is the right-hand option showing all of the hearts being highlighted in yellow with the box around them. On the M17, same thing, we hit group, and then it's either select individually what you want if you only wanted some of the designs, or select all. And we'll hit OK. Once you hit OK, you get a limited pool of options. You can only do a couple of things with a grouped design. You can either copy it, throw it away, or move it. So I could move with the arrow keys, but I want to quick center using my heart on a crosshairs. And let's see, actually, so this won't allow me on the 500E, a little bit of a downgrade. We'll just manually sort of move that up towards center. Okay, I could have copied it and thrown it away as well. When I'm done, I hit ungroup to get back to all of my options. So they're not permanently grouped, they're temporarily grouped. Okay, we are almost done with all of our editing options. What's left to us is some color options. Looking at the 500E, we've got a color wheel. This is how we recolor something that we want to visualize differently. We talked about in the first activity that you can really just put whatever color you want on the machine. It doesn't know that you're matching that color number exactly. It doesn't even know that when it says yellow, you're even getting a yellow. You can do your own thing. But if you want to visualize something different, this is helpful. So I'm going to hit the little rainbow circle, and it shows me the current design that was selected at the time I hit that circle. And oh, I want to see what this looks like in blue. Once I've selected the main color, I can drag between shades and tints. And then when I like it, I can hit OK. Ooh, I do like that. That's lovely. Let's do the same on my M17. I've still got a rainbow circle. And let's say in this one, I didn't want to edit the word B. And so I'll tap the B itself and tap the rainbow. And now it shows me, because this one's more than one color, it shows me all the colors. So this is trying to show you white. And then you can see it a little better. Now that it's onto the yellow detail, it's highlighted that. See that difference there? It gets bolder when it's its turn. So maybe I want to recolor it purple. It's a purple bee. Sure. And then I can drag that around and hit OK. Oh, lovely, a purple bee. I don't like that. I'm going to put that back on yellow. Now, ooh, well, let's not do that. Get to that purple and hit yellow and OK. All right. I have been asked, and it's a very legitimate question, can I teach the machine the exact brand and color number that I'm using? So for instance, the isocord that I have on here is isocord 400721. On the Janomes, you cannot teach them that particular color number. It can tell you for built-in designs what color it thinks you should use, but you can't tell it what color you want to use. So this is an abstract coloring that you're doing. Again, it's just a visualizing tool. So you're just picking a abstract tint or shade, let's say, of the hue that you want. Okay, that's recoloring. The last there's 3 items. Let's go over saving the design first. So that would be the folder with an arrow pointing into it, not to be confused with the folder with an arrow coming out of it, just as you would imagine, filing in or taking out of a file. So on the M17, I push arrow going into a folder, and it takes me to the filing system. I can save to the machine. I can save to a USB stick. I'll save to the machine. If you hit OK out here, it doesn't save. It's like you got to the filing cabinet, but you dropped the paper on the ground outside the filing cabinet, and then the janitor came by and swept it up. You must open a folder, and then here, you can just save a file. You can just hit OK here. Now, M001 is not very descriptive. I'd love to be able to, at a glance, tell what that was. So we're going to go into EMB, and I'm going to rename it using the pencil icon, and we'll call this B. Okay, that should be easier to find later. Let's do that on the 500E as well. So we want the editing option showing an arrow going into a folder, machine versus USB stick. You are inside a folder right now. You're inside the EMB folder. So this is actually inside the filing cabinet, but I'm obsessive. I go all the way into EMBF just for safety. I hit the pencil, I name it B, and I hit OK, and I hit OK. So let's say that you turned your machine off and you turn it back on, and now you want to retrieve your file. So I'm going to turn both my machines off. There it is. And then turn them back on. And what we're simulating here is it's a brand new day. And you might get asked to calibrate. Now you might get asked that if it wants you to, if you want it to return you to the last design. That I'm going to say is cheating. I mean, that's a really good way to do it, but let's learn the hard way in case for some reason you're not offered the chance to resume. So I'm going to hit X on there, and now we'll do it the hard way. So on the M17, we're going back to the folder with an arrow coming out of it. We're taking something out of our filing system. I remember I saved into the machine, into EMB, and then I saved B. And this one is actually kind enough to show me pictures, so it didn't really matter that I hadn't given it a descriptive name at first. That's nice. On the 500E, we go into the folder with an arrow coming out of it, machine, EMBF, and this one's a lot smaller, so I kind of like that I named it something descriptive. and it brings it up. It brings it into ready to sew, and that's true. Oh, wait for this to move. It brings you to ready to sew, and that's something it does every time that you wake the machine up and grab your first design. To get it back into editing, we're simply going to, on the M17, push the pencil on a flower, or on the 500E, hit home and then the grid, which is edit. Perfect. Now we're back to where we were. Okay, now what we have left truly is just color options. The first one I want to talk about is the icon that shows white, yellow, and below it a white spool and a yellow spool. So to understand what this does, I'm going to make a duplicate of this design. So let's say the B lettering. I'm going to copy that and drag it down so that I have a duplicate of the same thing. And then on the M17, I'm going to copy my little bee design, and now I have two bees. Okay, back to the 500E. I'm going to scroll over till I see that white, yellow, white spool, yellow spool. If I don't do anything at this point, so if I'm done and I just hit OK, so I'm actually going to ignore that icon for now. It's going to say, okay, here's the plan. We're going to stitch the yellow beak, and again, I'll put us on, there we go, yellow beak, the body, the detail, the wings and the tail, last detail, the eye. Oh, this one knew to do the lettering at the same time. Okay, that's unusual. Let's go back and let's copy the bird. Copy. Okay, there we go. And we'll go hit OK. And now, if we just look at our list of colors, scroll down, list of colors, it's going to do, you can see there's the yellow of the beak. There's the yellow of the beak again. There's, you know, the body and the body. It's going to do the two birds as totally separate units. So if I scroll through with my single color on, you'll see 1, 1, 1, 1, onto the lettering, and then back to the second bird. So it didn't condense them that time because I put them in not next to each other. If they weren't copied right after the first one was put in, I put the first bird in, I put some lettering in, then the second bird. So the two were not next to each other in the same way that these two single color designs were copied next to each other in the order of addition. And so there's a setting that's on that's, you know, combine same colors that sit next to each other in the order. But the bird is perfectly showing that it's not planning to stitch those out all beak colors first, all body colors first, all wing colors, etc. Okay, so now that we've established that that is what we're seeing when we don't do anything, so 11 color changes, oh my God, I go back to edit, and now I'm going to say, try to condense. If you've got two white colors separated by a yellow color, do all the whites first, then go on and do all the yellows. So once you push this, it says, okay, here's what I think is the same color. It says, I think the first bird is totally unique. I think the two sets of words are the same, so they're both highlighted. And then I think the second bird is totally unique. So this is not the smartest system. It hasn't appropriately sensed that those two birds are the same color. So unfortunately, it is like rejecting. It won't combine those. And that's a good thing to realize, and I'll show you how we adapt to that. Because what I think it is you get a certain amount of edits on a design, or like clicks since adding it, at which point it sort of forgets that it's the same design. So I have the most success with combining if I bring a design in, say make one edit, like shrinking it, copy it, and then do this. So it'll happen some of the time, and we'll see if I can make my M17 show you the proper way it should be doing this. So I've got two bees, two pictures of bees, and I hit combine colors, and it says, okay, I think that the black in the letter B is totally unique. but I think the 2B pictures are the same sets of colors. And so when I go to sew them out, it is going to do all of the whites, all of the yellows. I'm not going to see that it makes me do those yellows twice, as it normally would when I have 2 separate bees. So that worked well there. When it works, it's great. I'd love it if it also had sensed, say that that lettering was black and that the body of the bee was black, but that basically it never is able to sense because there's 2 unlike objects, I guess. So if it doesn't fully sense, or like we had with our bird example, it didn't get it at all, it didn't condense my colors, you're not stuck doing 6 color changes. Or in this case, I'm just lazy and I don't want to do the lettering and the bee bodies in 2 different steps. I want it all at once. You're just manually going to advance to that color. So we would let it stitch the lettering. And then when it says, okay, now put your pale blue on to do the wings, we would instead say, nope. And we're going to skip down until 5 is at the top of the list and stitch that out. Didn't have to rethread my machine. Then when that's done, I go back up to where I was, which was the wing detail. And that way I didn't have to rethread. So it just took a little bit more clicking in order to not have to rethread, which I think is a win. I'll take it. If your designs are overlapping, you don't want to combine colors because generally there's an order that you want that overlapping to happen, and you want to say layer down the lettering, layer the white wing on top of the lettering, then put down the black wing detail, not put the black wing detail down with the lettering and then cover it with the white. So if it is a layered design or shading of multiple colors, you don't want to do that combine. Okay, we'll go back to edit. And I'm going to delete my extra options because they're ugly and they bother me. Here we go. Let's see, second B. Okay. The last color option I have is make monochrome. And you can see that as a colorful flower with an arrow pointing to a white flower. You can see that on both machines. Let's see, here we go on the 500E and the M17. This shows a multicolor flower becoming all one color. And as soon as I push this, it's going to move me to ready to sew. This is always the last thing that you can do. Same thing with the combined colors with the white yellow. That was the last thing that we looked at because it forces you on to the ready to sew screen. You can't do any more edits. So if we want it to be monochrome, I push it. It says, okay, are you sure? I'm not going to let you change colors. And you can hit okay. And it even makes it look really boring. It made it all white. And then on my 500E, hit OK. And again, it's all kind of boring. It changes it all into this like grayish white. Okay. So that was all the editing options, believe it or not. If you want, you can pause me and go back through and, play with all these and make sure that you understand what each of them is. But for the rest of us who are ready, I'm going to keep mine as monochrome. We are going to go on to actually doing a little bit of stitching with this design. And I've got another activity for us related to hooping. All right. So what I want us to do to prep for this activity is we're going to imagine a different type of embroidery project than what we did in the first activity. In the first activity with the school bus, it would be the idea that you're going to embroider an oversized piece of fabric and then cut it down to size, say down to the size of a quilt block, and put it into your quilt. So at that point, it didn't really matter where you hooped your fabric. As long as you had a plenty oversized piece, you knew you could cut it out and center the bus in the cutout as you were cutting it. Now let's imagine that I'm doing a pre-finished item, like a towel. I bought a towel at the store, I'm embroidering it, and of course I don't want it like weirdly off to the side. I want to center it. So what I've done is I've marked my towel with a center mark. And I'm sort of doing this backwards. What I would encourage you to do is mark your fabric, then hoop. I've already hooped, so I'm just going to invent. I have a chalk pencil here, and I've marked crosshairs. So we'll imagine that that is the center of my towel that I had pre-marked. When you go to hoop, you're going to try to center the design in the hoop. And there are these templates that come with all of your hoops, and they will lay nicely in there, and they will show you where center is. Now you can hoop again at this point, or try to pull your fabric to the side. You do want to be within like an inch of center. Don't have your crosshairs way over here. But it gets agonizing really quickly because I am not centered there. I'm off by about a centimeter. It's agonizing to try to rehoop, and you just can't get it perfect. So you get close enough, and we can adjust after the fact. So I'm within an inch of center, a little left, a little down of center with my mark. Go ahead and get to that point. So hoop your project with your center mark somewhere close to center. Okay. At this point, we're going to adapt to our misaligned center. We're going to move the design center to where the center of the project actually is. So we're going to put our hoops on, and let's look at the 500E to start. So we have the option before we start stitching to move the design. And right now it is showing us the center. The needle is showing us the center of the design. That's always how it's going to bring it into this screen. So before I do anything else, I am going to find an icon that shows a thread spool, and then it's very faint, but there's a slash and 4 arrow keys behind it. This is a dual function button. Basically, your screen isn't big enough, and so you either can look at your thread colors or your position. So I'm going to swap. I tap that button, the 4 arrow keys. These are called jog keys. If you look them up in your manual, they pull up. And so now if I have a off-center mark, say right there, I can now moves a little quickly, woo, and then I can check with my needle and make sure that my needle's hitting the center of the crosshairs. And it can be a little agonizing because it does move by 0.1 of a millimeter every click, which is why you kind of want to be closer rather than further. On the M17, it's a little easier in that I don't have to repetitively lower my needle to check the position because I can turn on that laser. The laser is turned on with this, I say crosshairs a lot, but this legit is a crosshair. Turn that on, and you can see my laser light came on. So now I can use these jog keys. We don't have to swap screens because our screen is big enough to show us all the information at once. And we will scooch that laser light over. And down. Oop, a little too far. Yes, there we go. Dead on. Okay. So now we've got the needle over the marked crosshair. To reiterate, what did we just do? We hooped our project not quite perfectly centered, but the design was still centered in the hoop. And so we need to adjust the position of the design until it is over the center of our project, because it doesn't matter if it's centered in the hoop, it matters if it hits the mark on the project. And so we have moved the center of the design into the center of the project marked with a chalk crosshairs. So we've aligned. Now, if you also hooped a little crooked, you get like a little last minute rotation. How do you tell how much to rotate? Well, I'll be honest, unless you get the protractor out, it's kind of going to be by feel, but you do have an option to do a last minute rotation, which on the M17 sits right next to your laser crosshairs, and then on the 500E is right below your jog key. And both of those are going to give you 5 degrees of rotation in pretty minimal. What's cool about this is you can only rotate by 1 degree at a time in the editing. And so this is by half degrees. And so you can get quite precise. The only thing is it is kind of hard to check your work. So you would be going by protractor or by feel, by instinct, let's say. And that has been slightly rotated if I think that I hooped a little bit crooked. Okay, with me so far. If you needed to check a different point, let's say that it doesn't matter that the center of your design is aligned. What matters is that the lettering is on a baseline. You could do that as well. It just takes a little more work. So instead, I'm going to draw a baseline on my fabric. If I was cool, I'd use a ruler, but I'm not cool. And now I have to bring the cursor to the corner of the letter B. First thing I can do quickly is jump to the lettering, which I think is actually this first one, but if I thought it was the last black, I could just jump through it. Let's see, is that the first? Yes, it is. Okay, so that's the very first stitch brings me close, but actually if I get my eyeballs in there, it's not actually in the corner of the B. And so I'm gonna go through, and this is where I said it takes more work. You're gonna try to figure out when exactly does it stitch the corner of that B. And I'm just pressing and holding. It speeds up its rate of jumps as you go. So I actually let off to sort of reset because eventually it'll start jumping by like hundreds, and that's too fast. Ooh, here we go. Okay. Yep, that's what I want. So now it's jumping from top to bottom of the B. So I just need to stop with the crosshairs at the bottom of the B. I've said the word B a lot. You should count it up and write it in the YouTube comments how many times I say B in this episode, and you will get like a psychological prize for doing that. You'll be our greatest fan. Okay, so now the needle is showing me, or the laser in this case, is showing me where the bottom of the B is going to get stitched. And I can tell that my baseline is higher than that, so I'm going to move the design to adjust. Now, there are settings that can prevent you from moving at this point, depending on sort of the presets. So I'm going to go into my settings and remember how I said that the reason that it auto realized that the words were the same color, I was doing that on the 500E, that's the consecutive color grouping I was talking about. Oops, pushed it out. All right, embroidery settings. Design positioning during embroidery. I'm going to turn that on. And on the 500E, let's see what that's called. Embroidery settings. Interesting. I might be used to the 550, which lets me do that. Maybe it'll just let me do it whenever. Let's see. So I'll know, because if I advance my stitches, it'll either let me adjust or it won't. Oh, good. Okay. I'm glad the default is to allow it. I hate it when it limits you. So you may have to turn on the ability to keep positioning after it starts stitching. It's like a safety feature where it wants to allow you to lock it in place in case like you bonked those accidentally. But I want that on where yes, you can use these arrow keys after the fact, because now that I'm away from stitch 1, I need it to let me move, and I'm going to move, again, watching the laser or lowering the needle to make sure that the B ends up on the baseline. So that would be how you align something that is not the center of the design, which is always the default that it shows you. You have to advance through the design. Okay, you guys are doing really awesome. This is getting into pretty advanced stuff, so I'm pretty proud of you if you're sticking with me. If you need to rewatch part of this, or maybe even advance on your embroidery journey, do some embroideries, then come back and talk about this positioning. I'm not at all upset or surprised if that's just a little bit beyond your capacity to take in right now. It's totally legitimate to fill up your brain and need to do some embroidery, get a little more comfortable with it, and then you'll come back and say, okay, this makes more sense now. Okay. So that is the last of the changes we're going to make. I'm going to stitch out this lettering just so we can look at it. Go ahead and stitch out some of your design as well if you want. Again, we're not really going to run the full design for time reasons. And then when we come back, we're going to do kind of a special activity that picks up some of the pieces, little things that we haven't gotten to do. It'll be our most advanced activity yet. Specifically, if you don't want to wait to be told, it is floating a funny fabric with a topper. Okay, so we're going to stitch out some activity 2, and I will see you back when you're ready to advance to activity 3. All right, welcome back to activity 3. This one is going to be pretty short. The goal is to pick up just a few advanced techniques, the last few options that you have before we end. And you'll notice that I have something a little different going on here. I have hooped just my stabilizer. That is also what you're going to do at home. And you'll also need that square of a faux fur or a fleece, something fluffy, heck, a towel with a nap to it. And you'll notice I have a very small square. Definitely cannot be put into the hoop. So what we're demoing with this activity is floating a project, which is to mean the project itself is not caught in the hoop. Now you always have to hoop something. In this case, the stabilizer. Sometimes it means that you hoop your fabric and then the stabilizer might be floated if you realize after the fact that you need more stabilizer, and so you're just adding it after you've started stitching. But this will be the most common example, which is you hoop your stabilizer and you float your project. A couple reasons. Number 1, maybe it's too small to fit in the hoop. Maybe it's too thick, and getting it in between the 2 rings is just a Herculean effort, and it's not worth the trouble. Maybe it's made of a material that will have permanent marks like velvet. So if you crush velvet in between the inner and outer frame, those marks would be there forever. Maybe it's too awkward. Maybe it's like a hoodie or something, and you're actually getting, say, the back out of the way, and so it's partially almost like turned inside out to get the front on here. Lots of different reasons that you might like to float. Some people will float just quilting cotton because they'll feel like it keeps the fabric as relaxed as possible. I mentioned it very briefly when we were hooping. You don't want to overstretch your fabric, because if it stitches out stretched, when it relaxes, your stitching crowds closer together, doesn't look as good. So if you really want your fabric to stay relaxed, you can consider floating in the way that we're going to do here. Now, when you do this, you are always attaching your project to the hooped item, because you don't want to run the risk that this stays put while the hoop moves, and then you're not going to get a design. This needs to move in lockstep with the hoop, so it needs to be attached in some way. You have a couple of options for that. One is adhesive stabilizer, which I've got here. It has a wax paper side and then a stabilizer side. This happens to be adhesive wash away. You can get adhesive versions of most of the stabilizers in a product line. The way you use it is you hoop the stabilizer in the hoop with the wax paper facing up towards you, because that shows you where the adhesive is. Then once it's in the hoop, you score the wax paper and you rip away the paper to reveal the adhesive, but just within the bounds of the hoop. You can imagine if you peel the wax paper off first, then put it in your hoop, that adhesive gets all over the underside, in between the frames. And it's obnoxious. It will collect lint and look really gross. So we hoop it so that the wax paper is still covered over here, and then we just peel away to reveal adhesive inside of the inner frame. Okay. Adhesive stabilizer is expensive, so I don't use it for every single floating project. I reserve that for things that really are fighting me, like the hoodie example, where it's trying to, you know, relax and fold back over, and so I need all the help I can get, sort of just holding it down in place. With a less fussy material, you can get away with just painter's tape, so blue tape. It's, you know, no adhesive or low adhesive, won't leave a residue. In this case, this I am hoping and I'm expecting is going to be so low maintenance that I'm not even going to use tape. But I am going to use the one attachment style that I never go without, which is a basting box. We're going to make the embroidery machine stitch the fabric to the stabilizer. There's one last thing I'm going to add to this before I stitch that box, which is a topper. Toppers are a specialty stabilizer, obviously meant to go on the top of your project. What I have here is called Stitch H2O. It is a product by OESD, which besides producing embroidery designs, produces a bunch of embroidery products. This is a wash away, hence the name Stitch H2O for water. And you can see it's see-through. It's kind of like saran wrap. The idea of a topper in this case is we're stitching through a pile, and especially this faux fur is a great example. We've got like a pile that can really be distorted. So what we're worried is going to happen is that as we're stitching, the foot is going to push that fur around and then stitch it down at a weird angle. And then the fur will kind of cover it half over, maybe obscuring some of the stitches. We really want to make sure that the stitching lays cleanly on top of the fur. Even in the example of like a fleece, which really doesn't have, you know, a pile in this way, the stitches will still sink in and the fleece might poke through a little. Or even on some knits, knits will have like a little nap to it. Sometimes you'll find your stitches sink in. So you might use a topper on a lot of things, toweling for sure, and then definitely, you know, thicker, fluffy items. And I'll just cut a little bit of this. I want to show you my favorite way for organizing stabilizer so that I don't forget what this is you take off the label. When you took off the plastic wrap, you roll it up and you stick it inside the tube. That way you always know what this is. Okay, and we're going to lay that on top. If I'm, you know, feeling really opinionated, I might kind of pet all the fur the direction I want it to go. That's good enough for me. And if I wanted to, I could put some blue tape on there. Okay, now to tell the machine that I want a basting stitch. We're going to do this again, as usual, on both of the machines that I have for demo. We'll start with the 500E. And I have the design from last activity. That'll work just fine. And you'll notice that there is an icon showing arrows pointing at each other. I tap that, and it gives me a multi-option menu. Now we'll go to the M17. And I just went through a learning experience. If your hoop is not on, it will not offer you the option to do this function, the trace and baste function. So make sure your hoop is on. And then we will push these 4 arrows pointing at each other. We get to the same menu. There are multiple abilities stacked in here. The first one that's highlighted is trace. And this is good because I'm not exactly sure where that design is going to stitch out, and I want to make sure I lay my little square in the right spot. So the first thing I could do is say, where's the upper left corner? So yeah, I'm pretty far off. Where's the bottom right corner? Ooh, okay, I better move my project. So I'll take a best guess there. I can also say, just show me all 4 corners. Okay, you know, I've been more centered in my life. Let's just try that again. Okay, one more time. There we go. Perfect. So now I know where to put my fabric. The next option over, and this is true for both machines, is based around the outside of the design. And that is one that I am definitely interested in. It's going to baste just barely outside it, so it's holding it as close as it can to the design, which really is what I want. I don't want the next one over. I've never figured out why I would want that. And if you have a super secret edge case where it is, put it in the comments. I'd be interested to know. It bastes both inside the design and on the outside, meaning that once you start stitching your design, it's going to track over the basting. And usually you end up with half the basting stitch sticking out from underneath it, and it gets really hard to pick it out. So I don't really know why you would want to do that. I'm definitely interested in baste around though. So for both my 500E folks and my M17 folks, everybody, you should all be able to find the second icon over showing just one set of lines. And then I always get confused. I'm looking for like a go or an okay. They obviously realized that because on the M17 they say to start, press start stop button. There's nothing hinting at that on the 500E screen. And so you just have to know to hit start stop, and that always gets me for a second. So I hold my tail and I hit start. Notice I'm sort of petting this. I'm kind of holding this flat as I go. Okay. Now, what if it didn't stitch a basting box, or it made it halfway around pretending to stitch before it actually started stitching your basting box? That happens. It's okay, and there is a workaround. Basically, no embroidery machine, I'm not just talking Janome, but no brand, likes to stitch basting boxes. Something about those long stitches, they just don't like it. So sometimes you have to convince your machine to stitch the basting box. So if it failed to stitch, we're just going to try again. And this time, I'm going to hit start to let it move to the corner, and then stop. I want to stop it before it takes that first stitch. Now I am going to manually sew a stitch by turning my hand wheel and giving my top thread a yank, and it brings my bobbin thread to the top. Now I'm going to hold on to both the top thread and the bobbin thread. For some reason, this is the trick to convincing them to stitch. And now I'll hit start and let it continue as normal. Okay, now I actually did get a basting box, so I'm not going to worry about that second one. And again, it's not particularly worth getting mad at your machine over if it doesn't do that. No machine likes a basting box. Who knew? Okay. Now, if you have a 500E, you have now completed, or you've seen all of the options available in the submenu. If you have a 550 or an M17, you've got one more option, which shows a single square with dots in the corner. I do really like this. This is a big reason to get a 550 over a 500, is this is a custom basting box. Why do I like this? Well, there's lots of times you want a basting box out at the edge of your hoop, not just here close up to the design. This is great, but I want another basting box. Think of the hoodie example, where the hoodie is fighting me every step of the way to relax and unfold. And so, I've got the chip clips on it, trying to hold the excess. I need extra help holding down the perimeter, literally. And so I am going to make a custom basting box that is as big as the hoop. The way you do that is you start with the upper left corner. So I select A, and it will show me, okay, I'm currently planning to stitch the upper left corner right here. Not going to work. I am going to move that up and to the left into the very corner of the hoop, and it won't let me overshoot. Okay, that's as high as it can go, and left. And then we say, okay, where are you planning to stitch B, which is the bottom right corner? And it says right there. And I say that won't work. Go all the way down. And all the way to the right. have now taught it the custom position of my basting box. Obviously in this example, it doesn't make sense, but in a project where you've got a big overflowing project, this is super duper useful. So I'm going to hit start. So there's an example. It's not stitching my basting box. I could like exit out of this menu and go back, but I just trained it where my spots are. So I'm just going to say, okay, let's salvage it. Let's start right here. So I'm going to raise my foot, grab my top thread, manually sew a stitch, grab the bobbin thread that pops up, hold on to both, and start again. And it's absolute magic. It worked. It's stitching now. Okay, and then if I want to recover the part that didn't get stitched, I could hit start again, hit stop when it gets up to here, pull up my bobbin thread with the top thread, and then stitch just to there, and then exit this menu. That's totally fine. Now, if you were watching this and you have, say, the 500E, and you don't have a custom basting box, and you say, oh my God, Grace, what you said about the hoodie really resonated. I really need that big basting box. I have been known to cheat the system. What I will do is put a really big design in, or put a design in the corners of the hoop. So I would go into Edit, and I would say add some text. Oh, don't go into Edit, sorry. Go to Text, hit, I don't know, A, sure. Drag it into the upper left, maybe. Oh, there goes the B. Hold on. All right, drag it into the upper left, put my B back, copy the A, come here. Drag it into the lower right, and then hit OK. And when I tell it to make a basting box, let's see, basting box, just around the outside of the design, my design is now huge, and it will go to the very corner of the hoop. So if you don't have that custom basting box, I mean, it might even be quicker, even with this custom basting box. I might just in the future do that A's in the corner to force it to stitch around the outside of the hoop. So there is trickery you can do. Just remember not to let it stitch out the A's at the end. Okay, so we've got our project basted together. That ain't going anywhere. And I am going to let it stitch just the lettering, just for, again, time reasons. And then I'll show you how nice that topper does in making those stitches look really nice. You can go ahead and stitch as well, and I'll see you on the other side. All right, so we've got my completed B, and I went ahead and ripped out the basting stitches so that you guys could get just a quick shot of the fun part, which is ripping off the stitch H2O. It just comes off really nicely. And then you can get a tweezers to pick out the little bits that are left behind. So much comes out that even though this is water soluble, I really have never had to douse my project, which I'm really against. Things just don't look the same after they've been submerged in water. If I had any little shiny bits left after I went through with the tweezers, I will get a Q-tip wet and kind of scrub at it, but I'm trying not to get the majority of it wet. And when I've got that all picked out, you will see, you know, I might trim a little bit of the fur. But it did stitch really nice. You know, there's a little bit of fur around it, but the stitching itself is totally covering the fur. That's exactly what that topper is supposed to do. So I am pleased with that, how that came out. And then I'm ready to unhoop and tear away my tearaway. So that is floating a project. Too cool, huh? Okay, so at this point, we've done our 3 activities that should take you through the majority of the abilities of these machines. There's a few, you know, advanced things, especially with the M17. I know that there's the Wi-Fi connectivity We've gone through the basics, the most useful stuff, I think, the most widely applicable stuff. And so, if there is a feature that you're curious about, I encourage you to put it in a comment under this video. Let us know what you're interested in seeing. We're always trying to make videos that appeal to the interests of our audiences. So it's always good to, put that out there, maybe get it on our list. The last thing I want to do with you guys is make sure that there aren't any burning questions about settings, and then real quick go over sort of cleaning and maintenance for those of you who maybe haven't watched my sewing video. So settings wise, we're going to start with the 500E, and as you are familiar with at this point, we hit the, I'll exit out of the submenu, hit the wrench that says set, and we'll go specifically to embroidery settings. So we've got auto tension. The tension always resets when you turn off and on again. So if you've done a temporary, like lowering your tension because you were seeing white bobbin thread on top, the next time you turn it off and on, it resets, which I like because I like to go back to a baseline at the end of the project. But if you're doing the same thing over and over, you've got to do 50 towels, and they all need lower tension, you don't want it to forget every time you turn it off and on. And so you can lower this by a couple of notches or raise it by a couple of notches, and that is a permanent memory even between turning it off and on again until you go back and you reset that. So you can set it to be permanently lower, permanently higher. Remaining bobbin thread is just your bobbin sensor alarm. I really like it at 0.5. It really does tell me when it's down to its last gasp of bobbin thread. I get annoyed when it tells me too early and there's still bobbin thread on there. So I always have mine at 0.5. Oop, what to do? Okay. Maximum speed setting we talked about. One stitch stop is the opportunity to trim or bring your bobbin thread up and say trim. I prefer to do it myself where I let the machine run a couple of stitches, get away from the starting point, and then I stop the machine myself and cut my threads. One stitch stop will literally take one stitch and then prompt you. It'll stop and prompt you to cut your threads. I just found it a little too hand-holdy. Consecutive color grouping I basically would always want on. If the same color sits next to each other in the lineup, like two pieces of lettering with the same color, do you want it to just go ahead and stitch those out one after the other without asking you? I would say the answer would always be yes to that. Hoop confirmation, that means when I go between editing or selecting a design and going to ready to sew, it always pops up that little window that says like, hoop 5.5 by 5.5. If that annoys you, you can turn that off, but I do think it's a good checkpoint because the machine itself does not know when the wrong hoop is on. And so if you gave it a smaller hoop and it was expecting a bigger hoop, it will just stitch onto the plastic edge, which isn't good for anybody. And so I kind of like that it does that reminder. Hoop calibration I would say you can pull your manual out if you feel like the center that it shows you is no longer in the center of the hoop, like you're using your template, it's not centered. Thread cutting, and then some settings. If you're using metallic thread, you'd want to turn your cutter off because metallic thread will dull your cutter. And then even though it's on, I can't, okay, some of these I can't change unless I hit settings, and then I would be able to adjust. So how long of a jump is long enough or is too short, I should say, to where it says that's so short, we'll be here forever if I cut all these. Why don't we skip these for now? And we have this really far down. If it's 1/8 of an inch or longer that the machine is jumping between stitches, it'll cut for you. One reason you might increase this or even like turn it off is on lettering, like really small lettering and just tons of letters. It adds quite a bit of time when it cuts every letter, and it adds little tangles in the back. You've got those little starting tangles when it first starts stitching, and in little tiny lettering, it can just get really dense with all those tangles. And so that would be a great time to turn that off. And just what it means is after it's done, you might have these little jump threads sort of linking your letters, and you would go back in and manually trim those. Cut at color change. I'd leave that on. It just preps you to change your thread when it's done stitching. It frees up your thread from the project. Cutting command. Ooh, that's a really good question. That might be related to prompting you to trim your threads after it starts. Thread selection, we talked about this. It doesn't have all the brands, just some select ones, but you can make it tell you color numbers in your preferred brand. Grid line, this has to do with that editing screen. So if you look at your editing screen and it's just too busy, you can go into your settings and embroidery settings. Grid line off, hit OK, and boom, it's a lot clearer, but maybe you're using those as like centimeter markings. Embroidery. Grid size, how big do you want those to be? The reason it's giving you 4/10 of an inch, what a weird measurement, is you would go to settings and say talk to me in millimeters, which is what this is designed for. And then that would say 10 millimeters, which is a centimeter. This is, a Japanese brand. They are talking in millimeters, not inches. I like it for inches when I'm just estimating the size of something, but that grid size does make a lot more sense in millimeters. Resume mode is the cheat I told you where we turned the machine off and on and it said, do you want to resume your last pattern? I like it if I accidentally turn my machine off before saving. Usually you have like a temporary, you can bring that back up the next time. And then if you don't save it, then it's forgotten. And that is all those pages. Okay, let's see if the M17 has anything unique to offer as far as those settings. We'll go into the gear and we'll ignore anything that's the same. Embroidery foot height, that is special, we knew that. You can tell it that you're using one of the couching feet, just so you're all on the same page, and then what height you want it to stitch at. Talked about those. Obviously you want your upper thread sensor on. Bobbin thread remaining sensor, they took that away. You know how I said the 0.5 is my favorite? They took that away on the new machines, is you no longer get to say how much thread you want remaining. I'm not sure if it's because they felt like it was inaccurate or something, but now it just tells you and there's no adjusting how much is left on there. Thread cutting, same thing. Thread selection. Ooh, locking stitch, that's fun. Turn those on. Design positioning during embroidery, I mentioned that is, if you advance through the design to a certain point, you'll still be able to move the design around. Hoop calibration, I wonder how you turn that on. Is it that you have to have a hoop on? Try to look in the manual and see when do you get the ability to do hoop calibration. Grid line, grid size, resume mode, all the same. Excellent. Okay, so that's settings for you. So real quick, let's talk about cleaning and maintenance. I do a more thorough cleaning and maintenance at the very end of my sewing, advanced Janome sewing mastery. I'm going to do the real quick version here, in case you've watched that first video and you're glazing over. So first thing I'm going to do is lock my machine, raise that plate. Again, if you've got a manual plate removal, you pull your free arm cover, your accessory tray off, and you push on that release lever in front. And then we are going to take the bobbin out, which takes out the bobbin case with it. Brush, 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 brush. Vacuum, vacuum, vacuum if you want. You don't have to vacuum. No blowing air in. No canned air, no compressed air. They're both forceful enough that they blow lint into places you can't get at, and it compounds the problem. Brush out your feed dogs if you are sewing, and then you can oil right at the very center of the circles. You've got a couple of circles, a white circle, a black rubber circle, and then a central silver circle, and then a white felt pad right in the center. That's your oiling wick. You can put a drop or two of sewing machine oil in there every couple of weeks. When you go to put it back together, make sure that the opening is at the top. Your numbers are level, just like a book looking at you. And then there's a little nubbin on the side that needs to sit to the left of this square block, and it just bounces against there. That's a little stopper. Tuck it in, get that nubbin to the left of the spring. It should sit against it. It's got a little wiggle to it. It's flat. I cannot unlevel it by tapping either side. Good to go. Pop my plate back on. check my work by rotating the hand wheel. If it makes a weird noise, if the hand wheel's really hard to turn, if it makes a crunching sound, you did something wrong and you need to try again. Okay, so that is sort of the embroidery, Janome embroidery from top to bottom. I'm so happy if you guys stuck with us, and we sure appreciate you watching. Please do like the video to let us know that you like this kind of long form mastery. It does take quite a few resources, especially of the person doing the videoing and editing. So any sort of kudos to Michael for doing that, I'm sure would go a long way toward him being willing to do more of these videos with me. And otherwise, we'll see you in our next one.